For today's lesson, I will be going over a brief video that will walk you through the notice and note signposts and anchor questions in fiction. So what is a sign? A sign in the world can tell us many things. It can tell us where we are, it can give us direction, or it can give us guidance. A sign can help us better understand a situation we are in. For example, if we see a stop sign, we know to stop. Well, in literature, there are signposts that we can also look for that can give us a better understanding of the situations we are reading about. There are 6 signposts that we are going to talk about: contrasts and contradictions, aha moment, tough questions, words of the wiser, again and again, and memory moment. The first signpost we will discuss is the contrasts and contradictions. The definition is when a character acts in a way that is contradictory or unexpected given how he or she normally acts. And a clue is when the author shows feelings or actions the reader hasn't seen before or doesn't expect. When you see a contrast and contradiction moment in the story you are reading, you stop and ask yourself, why is the character doing that? So here's an example of contrast and contradiction using the story Wonder. As you can see on my post-it there, I noted from pages 10 to 14 when Augie was driving in the car with his parents that he suddenly changed his mind about going to school. Now I stopped and I asked myself, why is the character doing this? And my reasoning is that initially Augie felt hurt when his mother lied to him and wanted him to go to school. Then he realized he wanted to give school a try. As a reader using this signpost, I want to pay attention to the changes the characters are making, and that's all that the signpost really focuses on. Here's our second signpost, the aha moment. And the aha moment definition is when a character realizes or starts to realize something that changes his or her actions or thinking. A clue is when the character says, I realized, or I suddenly knew, or now I know why, etc. When you come across an aha moment in your book, you stop and ask yourself, how might this change things? Here's another example using the story Wonder with the signposts of the aha moment. Notice on my post-it I marked the page 48, and this is when Augie realizes in his English class he's going to actually like school. And I stopped and I asked myself, how might this change things? And my reasoning is that this is the moment that Augie begins to see the benefits of school and how it might affect him. Our third signpost is the tough questions, and the definition for that is when a character asks a tough question that reveals his or her concerns, which are internal conflicts. And a clue for that in the story is when the character asks him or herself a difficult question. When I come across a tough question in the story, I stop and I ask myself, what does this question make me wonder about? Words of the wiser is the next signpost, and the definition for that is when an older character, typically mentor, advisor, something like that, gives advice or insight to the main character. And some clues to find in the story for you are typically a wiser, often older character offers a life lesson, usually in a quiet moment. And when I come across something like this in my story, I have to stop and ask myself, what's the life lesson and how might it affect the character? An example, once again, using the story Wonder. As you can see on my post-it, I've labeled it WOTW for Words of the Wiser, and I have given the page numbers of 115 to 116 when Via tells Augie to suck it up. I had to stop and ask myself, what's the life lesson and how might it affect the character in this situation? And my reasoning is that Via has had to grow up really fast and is mature for her age because of Augie. When Augie complains, Via has experience with pushing through hard times and thus for telling him to suck it up. So I thought that although she might not be someone who's wiser when you think in those terms, but she is someone who is older, who does offer Augie a lot of advice in the story, and something as simple as that can really go a long way with how Augie was probably feeling in that moment in the story. Again and again is our next signpost, and the definition here is when the author keeps bringing up the same image, phrase, or reference, and a clue in the story is typically a repeated image, phrase, or reference. When I come across something like this in the story, I have to stop and ask myself, why does this keep showing up again and again? We don't necessarily have an example from the story Wonder to use as an again and again moment, but we can use the story Bud Not Buddy, where we constantly heard that phrase of whoop, zoop, sloop. That would be a perfect example of an again and again moment in a story. Our next signpost is the memory moment, and our definition is when the author interrupts the flow of the story by letting the character remember something. A clue in the story could be something as, I suddenly remembered, or I remember, or thinking back. When I come across something like this in the story, I stop and ask myself, why might this memory be important? And a memory moment using the story Wonder again is on page 6. And if you noticed on my post-it, I labeled it as an MM, as memory moment. Page 6, Augie tells the story of the day he was born. Not that it's his own memory, but it's a family story that's told over and over again. So I stopped and I asked myself, why might this memory be important? And I think for my reasoning, it's because Augie shares this to explain the time he was born and to share some humor about his birth story. We could go on into more details and explain how maybe this is a story that gives him some kind of comfort, and that's why he reflects on it. So that is my example for memory moment in the story Wonder. And there you have it. Those are the 6 signposts for notice and note with their anchor questions for fiction. I hope this video was helpful and you can apply it for the next story that we will be embarking on.